Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School.
This week, we're going to continue our Taika Waititi Fest with one of his mockumentaries. I guess his only mockumentary, but What We Do in the Shadows, the vampire mockumentary. Can't wait to get into this one. Let's dive in.
All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Pulcher.
And if you like what you see / hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the places and spaces people find good media. This is our third installment of the Taika Waititi Festival.
Yes, sir.
Probably the one that really put him on the map, I think. He'd done a couple of movies before this, but this is the one that I think, right when it came out, everybody was talking about it, right?
Yeah, he did Eagle versus Shark and The Boy, and I think The Boy is the only one I haven't seen. But pretty small. And honestly, this is a pretty small film as well. But they did an awesome job with what they did here. We have kind of this like Christopher Guest style mockumentary a little bit, right? And
you have to give credit where credit's due, right? Like Christopher Guest. I mean, obviously the number one is still Spinal Tap,
king.
which had Christopher Guest in it, but then all of his Mighty Wind and Waiting for Guffman and all those.
Of course, Best in Show, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and and like it's always fun with these documentaries are always fun, especially if you have the right idea and the right thing. And pretty much what Guest does is he brings you into this world that you don't know. And of course, here we go into a world of vampires, which obviously we don't know. So it's super fun to play with. And it's an original take, again, playing with the tropes of a vampire into everything, right? And
there's so many tropes to play with. There's so many rules that exist in the vampire lore that you can toy with here.
And you can play them in this modern documentary of these guys in Wellington, New Zealand. And it's not even like there's anything really big happens in this movie. It's they have this unholy masquerade, which is why the documentary crew is there in the first place, is to film this, this masquerade ball thing that they have at the end of the movie. And but that's really the only thing. It's just like them hanging out and like worried about the dishes and like just like everyday vampire stuff, but like it's kind of silly and amazing.
And there's but at the same time there's also this very like I think that Waititi has sort of like three superpowers. One of them we've talked a lot about, which is this sense of humor, this gentle, playful silliness. That a lot of times, I feel like a lot of times is because characters who shouldn't be being overly polite are overly polite to one another, and that has its own like comedic value to it.
I mean, even look at something like Korg in Thor Ragnarok, right? Like something that he plays in that movie, but at the same time, like he's a big guy made of rocks. Like in the, he's the Thing basically,
right? But then he's like this very,
but he's like super nice, right?
Yeah, and like, is kind of like hey, is just really gentle and like like has manners, right? He's not rude. Mm-hmm. And I think so that's that gentle sense of humor is one of his superpowers. The second one is Waititi's own acting ability, which
underrated
is super underrated. His ability to do these different accents and different voices, that's a huge part of it. But then the third, which I don't think we've really talked a lot about unless it was in passing, is his vision of artistic design is so specific. Whether we go back to Hunt for the Wilder People, which is like the fun way that the text is written in this kind of like almost like childlike scrawl. Obviously the world, the Jeff Goldblum world that they get into.
Sakaar.
Is Sakaar. And here this house that they all live in is really a character in this because it has this really weird teal wallpaper with the animal heads on it. But then there's like a handful of weird chase scenes and things that happen throughout the movie that are, yes, definitely silly, but at the same time also very dreamlike and kind of spooky. And the way that these doors are kind of misshapen, or these hallways seem to snake down into darkness
For
left
sure.
and right.
And just the stuff like when we're kind of getting to know and introducing the four guys who the flatmates and inside of the house with Viago, Vlad, Deacon, and Peter. And I'm thinking of specifically Jermaine Clement's character Vlad, where he's having an orgy when he opens up the door, and you see this and it's changed the perspective, and it's flat.
Yeah.
Not like you would when you open a door. And so he puts you in these realms and these worlds that these guys live in. And
yeah, it's like the reality slips away constantly when they're inside of their house, and then they have to kind of go out and be sort of schlubby regular guys in the regular world of Wellington. But when they're inside the house, it's gravity doesn't really seem to mean anything. Perspective changes a lot. All of those elements work really, really well.
It's all really subtle, though.
It's very subtle. And I also love that even just you going down the names, the fact that the most bizarre of the characters has the most normal name, where Peter is essentially some cross between Nosferatu and the vampire from Salem's Lot. Right? This very creature bat-like looking thing.
So they all base their vampire characters off of different pop culture references of this. So Deacon is the Lost Boys.
Of course, yes.
Yes, right? Isn't that perfect? And Vlad is, he's the sex maniac, so he's Dracula. And then Viago is actually based on Brad Pitt's character in Interview with a Vampire, but also his mom. He says, because he's smiley and social and really nice. To your point of characters that he puts in that are seemingly nice that you wouldn't normally see being nice in a movie.
Yeah, having manners, right?
Just Viago, hey, flatmate meeting in 10 minutes, just reminding everyone to come around and we got to talk about the dishes.
The throwaway line where he's Vlad is kind of old school. He has some sort of antiquated ideas, and he's we should get some slaves, right? It's just that's a second nature. If we need cleaning up around here, we should just get some slaves, right? All of that. Well, and then the Lost Boys thing, the fact that they actually reference, Iago, he actually references
we
the Lost Boys. We stole that from Lost Boys, it's so silly. And that silliness, that silly kindness is so pervasive throughout this movie that it's what keeps it constantly delightful and constantly entertaining.
It's the little details too that keep it constantly entertaining, playing with those tropes they can't see themselves in the mirror when they get together to go out, man. So they have to draw each other what
Sketch.
They look like.
Or they have his clothes on a hanger, and they're making the clothes walk down the hallway, and he's I like this belt.
Yeah, and they just have these fashion shows, but down to when they get the internet and Stu shows them the internet, and they YouTube what a sunset looks like.
Amazing, amazing.
That's just something I would have never thought of. That that just again playing with the tropes of what a vampire can be. It's just the silliness is so important here. We continue to talk about with this festival.
Well, and to get back to what we talked about with Hunt for the Wilder People, he also knows how to dance this really fine line of allowing there to be these little touches of heartache in with the silliness. So whether that's Waititi's character, meeting the girl, and then his ship goes to the wrong place, and by the time he gets there, she's already married, and all of that stuff, and it's just you feel for the guy.
Then he puts on the silver necklace,
and it starts just smoking, and he's that's about as long as I can put it on. So that's hilarious. But then to your point of the YouTubing what a sunrise looks like or a sunset looks like, it's a throwaway gag early on. Later when Viago's all depressed, he's he won't get off the couch, and all he does is watch that sunset video over and over again, and you're oh, that's actually a really beautiful little touch that he just sprinkles in there long enough. He doesn't make it melodramatic, but he just here's what a vampire might do when he's depressed, right? And that little touch of heartbreak again is for as silly of characters as he creates, he also gives them really rich internal lives. So it makes all the jokes land way more effectively than they would otherwise.
And it's not just the little funny tropes that he plays with. It's also the circumstances that a vampire would be in that we wouldn't normally talk about, right? And so I'm thinking of something of like how they steal the clothes of their victims sometimes. Or like sometimes you want to kill somebody and be like, oh, those are nice pants.
Yeah, exactly. Or the fact that they try to go club hopping, but they can't get in because they have to be invited in everywhere.
Yes, another great one.
Just so damn good, man. All of those things are so funny.
And do you think for something like this kind of silly 90-minute movie, mockumentary, do you think that's all it needs to be? Is that stuff? I know you're talking about the little touches of their personal lives and stuff like that through this movie, but can it survive on being just those clever tropes and those little details?
Well, I think as long as and yes, but I think that it can, as long as you are confident enough that those elements work, that the arcs that you do throw in there feel earned. They feel within this world realistic, right? So we have the character Nick, who comes in and really kind of shakes things up because Peter turns him into a vampire also. Which again, that chase scene through the house is actually quite creepy. I mean, it's funny, and then it turns like pretty creepy just from the camera work and that set that they built and all of those elements. But there is like this like beautiful moment where Nick's like, well, first he talks about his transformation, and it's amazing seeing him almost like this heroin junkie rolling around on the ceiling, and then where he's trying to look at his neck, but his reflection in the mirror doesn't match up with himself. That's an incredible effect. Like even though it's very subtle.
All of the effects here are really good. Like just them flying or like when they
As silly as it is, it looks really great.
But it's like, but it does. You don't see the wires. You don't see any of that stuff. And like whatever they did, like they did a really good job. I definitely saw that. But yeah, just him like after he's transformed, just trying to fly in the window and he can't quite get in.
Yeah, and he's trying to get his legs in, and they're like, "Why don't you just come in through the front door?" And he's like, "Because I can fly." But when he gets his sort of first confessional talking head, and again, this is just all Waititi is Nick going, "I don't know, man. I mean, yeah, they killed me, but like they seem like pretty cool guys." And he's like, and like, I think they like hanging out with me, and they're all older than me, but I think that they're going to teach me new things, and maybe I can teach them new things too. And you're like, even though Nick is a total knucklehead and he gets him into a lot of trouble and he gets Peter killed and there's a lot of bad stuff that happens, but at the same time, you're also like, what other movie do you have a character that gets turned into a vampire and he's like, I hope they like me. I hope they want to hang out with me. And you're like, that is its own level of like small brilliance. That's all that the movie needs to do, is have these characters that are just reacting in such like diametrically different ways than you would ever think that they should, right? And that never stops working.
And I think he goes around the all around the city just saying I'm a vampire. They're like, hey, you can't just do that. And then they start being friends with Stu, his human friend, and they like decide they won't kill him as a group
because he's the most boring guy on the planet, but everybody loves Stu.
But they like him more than Nick, and Nick starts getting jealous.
Totally, he's knitting him. He's knitting him a sweater. He's knitting Stu a sweater. Like, just all of that, and like, why Stu? Why does Stu have this magnetism that they all just absolutely love? And he's just like the most dull, boring guy. But they're like,
and he's just like, oh yeah, he used to date my sister. And then they broke up, and then we stayed friends, and that's pretty much it.
And he says, but he tells him he's a vampire, and he's just like, okay,
cool,
yeah. All right,
Fatal Sun-like accident with Peter though is pretty epic and amazing. Like just the way that they thought about it. And there's actually a vampire hunter in the city who
Nick actually talked to earlier.
So, just funny kind of setting us up for all these things, and they put Nick on trial and everything
where they shame him. And they're just shaming and pointing and shaming.
Here are the things that are bugging. Yeah, shame.
That's so good. That like Nick is actually such a great, like he's a very, very funny character who you actually really feel for, even while he is being kind of a dick. Like he so even these characters that are disruptors within this world, you like them independently. Just like with all the werewolves. When we meet the werewolves, the argument between the two of them, where he even, the one guy says, "Oh, it's Count Fagula" or whatever, and he's like, "Whoa, dude, you don't have to say it. What are you doing? Why are you saying that? Like, that's super offensive term." And you're just like, who are these characters? Like, they're all such pleasant people, even though half of them are werewolves and the other half are vampires. Like,
I agree. Waititi continues to subtly put us in these worlds that we hadn't really thought about before, I guess. Yeah. And that's what you want in a movie, right? Like you want to be put in some place you've never been to before and experience it, whether it's scary or funny or like whatever. It's always fun doing that, and he does it, and he takes it a step further. Is kind of what you're talking about. Is with these little details, and we're not swearwolves. And apparently there is going to be a sequel to this about the werewolves called Werewolves.
Is there? I love it. I love that they're kind of these blue collar, scruffy redheads, right? Yeah. They all kind of look the same. Obviously, the head werewolf is why am I just
Rhys Darby?
Rhys Darby. They're chaining themselves to trees. Later, when we see them actually transform. Again, it's all from very far away, shaky effects, but the special effects are amazing. The creature design of these werewolves is brilliant looking.
Yeah, it's really cool, and the way they shoot it is really unique as well. So they do a great job with the effects there. Like,
but then there's stuff like the bat fight. It's a bat fight. They're having a bat fight where both of them turn into bats, and they're just and it's like the silliest, most non-threatening looking thing you've ever seen, right?
Yeah. Two other tropes I want to hit on real quick. When he eats the chips and they're like, "Oh yeah, you shouldn't eat that."
The vomiting, the blood vomit is just
puking blood. And then also when the police stop by and he's not very good at hypnotism, but he tries it anyway. And that whole scene is like I know all the swearwolves and those scenes get talked about the most, but that is an underrated scene in this movie. Is when they walk through and you're just hoping. It's almost kind of like a tense scene because you hope they don't figure out.
Yeah, and he's like, "Now look at that over there.
That's a fire hazard.
You got paint rags right on top of your paint bucket. That's a fire hazard right there." And he's like, "Yes, we'll have to move that." And then as he's going upstairs, he's like, "We should kill them." And he's like, "No, let's wait and see." Like, just so funny. Good. Absolutely,
it's just kind of endless. Let's get to this ball and this unholy masquerade ball, and we've been hearing about the beast through this whole movie, right? And Vlad doesn't want to.
His nemesis.
It's his nemesis through this whole movie, and it turns out that that the beast is the guest of honor at this unholy masquerade ball.
It's his ex-girlfriend,
and it ends up being just an ex-girlfriend that he didn't like. Or that they went sour in some way that he wasn't happy with. So I love that because you're just like, ooh, the beast. They build it up. It's kind of this weird picture of this, like, they do a really good job of telling the history of vampires.
And we should mention that. That's one of, and I think I was so enraptured with everything else that was going on that the first couple times I watched this, I didn't notice this, and this time watching it last night, I really, really paid attention to it, which is like, it's such great, like, woodcuts and old Daguerreotype type photos and like sepia tone, like Wild West photos, and then photos from the 80s, and
just the portraits of the portraits of them painted and that kind of stuff. It's It's amazing. But yeah, you know, they build up and the beast looks like it has like a dick on its stomach, and like they like draw these weird things on it,
Yeah.
and like you're just like, oh, what is that thing? That's gonna be the bad guy.
You're
and
like,
then we
no,
get
it's
there, it's
just-
just an ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, it's just an ex-girlfriend of Vlad's. Well, and he's so bummed out that he wasn't the guest of honor that he like ages. He like turns all old and decrepit looking, and they're all like, "Oh God." Right? And what does he say? He says, leave me to sit here and do my dark bidding." He's like, "Oh, what are you
Yeah.
bidding on?" And he's bidding on eBay on something. You're like, "Oh
Yeah.
God, come on, puns. Puns, puns, puns."
So many puns. And then I think we got to touch on the other character here, Jackie, who is Deacon's like slave, basically.
Yeah, he's familiar. Yeah, he's
Familiar, that's the word I was
She's
looking
his
for.
familiar.
But she's getting tired of it, and like they show up at her house and stuff, and ask her to do things. And
Well,
her
and
kids have to.
she's basically his servant, and he's been stringing her along for like 8 years that he's going to turn her into a vampire. And so once she finds out that Nick's been turned into a vampire, she rightfully is super pissed. Like, dude, I've been doing your laundry for 8 years, you asshole, right?
Well, it's like, hey, will you clean the bathroom? We killed someone in there last night. And you go into this like horror movie bathroom.
and she's just on the floor, like making a clean spot.
Yeah.
All of this gore in here. I mean, Waititi asking the girl if she's traveled much while he's putting newspaper down underneath her feet, and
It's
comes
serial
out with
killer
this
shit, for
stack of washcloths, and you're just like that scene on its own is worth them having made this movie. Like, if that had just been a sketch on Saturday Night Live, it's the fucking
Yeah.
funniest thing. Let
No
alone
doubt.
it
And-
just being like, and then he hits the main artery.
Yeah, and he has a problem continuing to hit the main artery where it's just spraying.
It's such a weird thing. And he's just like a fire hydrant, like trying to get his mouth over it. So
Amazing.
gross, so funny. But just putting down the newspaper and her telling him that she still wants to travel and she hasn't gotten the chance to travel very much. And he's like, huh, okay,
Yeah, I mean, just a delight of a movie. It is what it is. And I think if we're going to talk about Waititi, you have to talk about it. Like you said, it's probably the one that put him on the map the most, where, after it came out, people were talking about it. They're like, oh my God, you have to see this. And now to the point where they even turned it into a show on FX.
Turned it into a TV show with Matt Berry. Yeah. Well, and
Yeah, which is excellent too. It's great.
Oh, the TV show's fantastic and
Yeah.
totally its own animal. I mean, it
is,
takes
yeah.
it starts from the same premise, but then goes completely different places. The other thing I would just say as an observation of this movie is you could have ended this movie in a crazy bloodbath and it would have felt okay. You could have
Like
ended this
the
movie
fight, yeah.
as like a full subversion of the entire point of the movie, a la something like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where all of a sudden the cops just show up and arrest the film crew, right? You could have done any number of these things, in part because the world of the mockumentary, it's easy to say, never mind, we're not going to tie this up. The movie just ends, ta-da, and we accept that because there's lots of movies that do that.
I think a good comparison is something like The Rise of Leslie Vernon, where you're playing with the rules of these things that were basically created by pop culture, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And these
exactly.
old myths, these old stories, something like that, and turning on its head and playing with those rules and turning like the audience on itself a little bit.
Yep.
So,
but instead, what he chooses to do is to give us a really rich and defined happy ending, where all these not only do all these characters manage to figure out how to get along, the vampires and the werewolves, because Stu becomes one of the werewolves, and so they manage to all become friends with one another. Not just that, but also he gives our one story of heartbreak here a happy ending.
Yeah, the Catherine. Yeah.
Yeah, with Catherine, where he's like, I just said to hell with it. And, he's like, yeah, there's an age difference, and I'm 400 years old and she's 85, but I don't care what anybody says. Love is love, and it's so, again, it's so delightful. It's so delightfully uncynical. in a period of time where we deeply, deeply need that, right?
I totally agree that it's very necessary, but that's his superpower, right?
That is
Like,
his.
being
That's the world he has built.
well, and just like with every one of his movies, there's just like a delightfulness to it that you weren't expecting. And boy, I can't wait till you see Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, I
can't wait to talk
I
about that
cannot
one
wait.
next week. That might be my favorite one of his too.
Wow.
So, be ready for an awesome movie.
I'm so excited.
So yeah, so we'll get into that one next week. But this, just a great one again. We had to talk about, and yeah, he continues to surprise. Just I don't know. Yeah, there's just something about the importance of silliness, right?
Yeah, of kind silliness, of silliness that is at its own expense, not at the expense of a marginalized community, or B, like real feel bad funny, right? That cringy humor
Yeah.
that we talk about. How is this movie not cringy humor? It's somehow still just moves right
In the
past
vein-
that as well. Even for a mockumentary thing, like we were talking about with something like The Office, where it's like The Office was a great show and super funny, but it was like feel bad funny. It was like funny that you had to watch through your eyes like this because you were so
Yeah.
embarrassed vicariously for characters. And instead here, what's funny about it is that Nick's like, yeah, I know they killed me, but I hope that they still want to hang out. And somehow that's really funny without it making fun of any of the characters. I don't know how he does it.
Pretty brilliant, and
Yeah.
I hope he continues to do it through his whole career.
Yeah.
Because he's got that niche almost. He's created that new version of comedy, and we'll get into that more when we get into our one-on-one. That's gonna kind of end out this festival. But please like and subscribe, everyone, if you like what you see/hear. We're trying to grow this channel as much as possible, so appreciate the support. And we'll be back next week, like I said, with Jojo Rabbit.
Can't
We'll
wait.
probably throw some scene examinations in between these a little bit here or there as well when we
Yeah,
have
and if
those
you
and
guys
those are
have any
ready.
suggestions for those,
Yeah.
please leave them in the comments. We've started to build up a pretty good tally of those scene examinations, but we would love to hear some more from you guys.
Yeah, great. Yeah, please hit us up on any of those channels. Our email is deepdivefilmschool@gmail.com. Love to hear from you and hear those suggestions of scenes you want us to break down. But appreciate everyone. We'll see you next week.
Bye, you guys.